What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another Angle of Pursuit podcast, your fantasy football home over at fakepigskin.com. I'm your host, Kyle Robert. You can follow me on Twitter at NotoriousKRO. With me once again, coming back to his old stomping grounds, is Damian Dabrowski. What's up, Damian?
So it's good to be back, man. It's been a while. Obviously we're still in touch and stuff, and kind of talk about stuff, but it's nice to get come back on here, especially talk football. I haven't really done that in a while. Jumped into some of the baseball stuff, but yeah, I'm looking forward to it. We still got a couple months before the season, but MFL 10s are taking off, and a lot of stuff's changing. So good time to kind of run through some news.
For sure. So we'll talk. We're going to talk a bunch of young quarterbacks. We're going to talk some offenses. We're going to talk some other stuff. You mentioned MFL 10s. I'm running through those a bunch myself. Is there any trends that you've noticed or anything that you've been doing that you've kind of, when you've done a certain strategy, maybe you kind of really like the way your rosters are kind of working out and how your team's kind of developing?
Yeah, so the first two drafts I did, I got stuck in the 11 spot both times. So I ended up with pretty similar teams there. I didn't hate them. I didn't love them. I think the way the kind of the player pool breaks down this year, I think it really pays to have kind of a lot of people say top three. I kind of push it up to top five because I have the four running backs in Antonio Brown and kind of that group where those are the five guys that I just feel are so dependable, so consistent year over year. Obviously you can't fully account for injuries and things like that, like we saw with David Johnson last year. But aside from that, they're going to get the touches, they're going to get the production, and a lot of times, when you get that coming back kind of in the second and the third, you can still grab a second kind of bell cow running back and a receiver, and that kind of puts you off to a pretty strong start. Whereas if you go towards the end of the first round, the one trend that I have noticed, though, I think is that if you are at the back end of the first, I think Beckham and Julio have kind of been falling a lot further this year than we've seen them maybe in the last 2 or 3 seasons. Yeah. So if you do have the 9th or 10th pick, something like that, there's a chance you might actually be able to grab both of those guys, or maybe Michael Thomas on the way back, something like that. And if you can do that, then that's a terrific way to start off your team. I don't mind doing that at all. But where it gets tricky is kind of the third, fourth round. If you're in the back half of the draft, I think a lot of times you end up, in my case, I've been drafting a lot of Kelsey and Ertz there in kind of the third, fourth round, just because I didn't really love the receivers available there. Usually, guys that like Devontae Adams or Doug Baldwin, are kind of already gone by that point. And you don't really love the running backs available there either. Usually you're kind of, that's the beginning of where we see some of those rookies go, whether it's Geis or Penny. Obviously a lot of upside there with those guys, but also a lot more risk than with some of the earlier running backs. So that's kind of what I've been seeing. It's also kind of hard with the popularity of MFL 10s lately, and how many of them a lot of people do. It's kind of hard to really get a great gauge on it because so many people are trying out different strategies. I mean, the first one I did, the team that had the first overall pick drafted a running back with their first 6 picks. And it was an auto pick. The guy was making those picks, and that's obviously not something I really don't think I've ever seen in a draft before. There's been a bunch of teams that have taken 2-3 defenses in like the first 12 rounds, which again, I'm not going to do that. I don't think it's a very effective strategy if you kind of look at the numbers of how it breaks down season over season. But stuff like that happens. Same thing with quarterbacks. There's teams that wait, but then there's teams that draft 2 or 3 of them, 2 or 3 top 15 guys, and that will obviously kind of mess up your draft board. So a lot of different stuff at play, but I think I kind of like this kind of late June, July, when you can get a couple drafts in, and really kind of try to, there's a lot of uncertainty, but if you're kind of following the news, it's kind of a chance to capitalize on, kind of being able to get a couple of those guys a lot later. Last year was guys like Kareem Hunt or Chris Thompson or Alvin Kamara, that you were able to get kind of around this time. You probably got them 4, 5, 6 rounds later than they were going in drafts, closer to the season. So that's the advantage of that. I'm kind of breaking it down where I think I'll do half of my MFLs now, and then I'll kind of take a month off and do the other half right before the season. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, I think they're a great gauge because oftentimes if you jump in some of these, redraft like mock draft lobbies, like they're fun, but like people will kind of half-ass it, or they'll after the third round they kind of bail. Where in these MFL tens they take them more seriously, and obviously in best ball your format or your I guess your draft kind of ideas shift a little bit, but for the most part, it's going to give you a good gauge of kind of where you should expect players to go in your home leagues and whatnot. I do like picking actually kind of at the end. I'm typically a person that wants to lean receiver heavy. Obviously, if I'm getting one of the first few picks, it's going to be, Le'Veon Bell. It's going to be Zeke Elliott. It's going to be David Johnson. I'm going to, Alvin Kamara maybe. But I like grabbing receivers, so I love being at the back end and getting, like you mentioned. Look, I'm looking at ADP right now in MFL tens, and Odell's 10th overall, and then Julio's 13th. Like if I can start all my teams with Odell and Julio, like I'm doing backflips. I love the stability to get, and then I go down and I take my shots. I'm taking like I don't mind Darius Geis in the fourth round. I don't mind Rashad Penny. I don't mind Mark Ingram, who is going to be a good value because people are going to see those games he's going to miss, and I know that especially down the stretch, like he'll be a pivotal piece for my team. So I have been doing a lot of MFLs. I'm kind of like you, where I'm going to try and space them out. I've been trying to do like 2-3 a month, just to kind of keep it going, see if I notice any trends as I do it, whatnot. So as the season approaches, is there a player or a couple players that you're starting to get really excited about, players that maybe you're targeting a little bit earlier than MFL ADP says, that you think by the time season comes around, people are going to be on board with, and you're going to actually have to pay, a higher price than you are right now?
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, we're kind of already starting to see, coming out of minicamp and hearing a lot of the stuff the coaches had to say. I think a lot of those guys, that I kind of mentioned, when talking to you and Ben, 2-3 weeks ago, they've already gotten priced up in MFLs, and it's also, it's a different format too. So those guys will go higher in MFLs just because you're guaranteed to only, get their best games. You're not worried about trying to figure out when to start them. Whereas, in a traditional fantasy league, the couple guys I mentioned in terms of guys late that I was targeting, I'll kind of give you one at each position here. At quarterback, I was definitely going after Pat Mahomes
Mm-hmm.
a lot earlier than most people. At running back, I really liked Corey Clement. And then Kenny Stills at receiver and Vance McDonald at tight end. A couple names that I think, especially in best ball, are going to get moved up a little bit because if you're playing regular, kind of your standard format, nobody's really going to aggressively go after Kenny Stills because they have no idea when to play him.
Yeah.
But when you're only getting those good games, it's a lot easier. Same thing with Corey Clement. I'm sure his usage is going to be inconsistent. From week to week, and he's not a guy you're going to feel comfortable starting on a regular basis. But in this format, it's different. So those are guys that I like that are already kind of getting pushed up a bit. So I'm not necessarily getting them at value. I think one guy that I found myself grabbing a couple places is Devontae Booker. He's not a guy I necessarily like because it's tough to find a reason to like him given how kind of mediocre he's been so far in his career, and it certainly isn't for a lack of opportunity. It seems like every 3 or 4 weeks we would hear something about CJ Anderson getting nicked up or Booker, getting it in line for more touches, and then he would give us, 18 carries for 47 yards, and that would be that. So, but we'll see. A lot of the talk kind of coming out of Denver is that they're going to be willing to give him a shot. If he disappoints like he has, then I'm sure it'll become Freeman's job fairly early on. But if it doesn't, there's a guy that you can grab. I got him. In like the 10th, 11th round a couple of times that can be a 15 touch back if he performs. So that's a guy that's kind of fallen to me a couple times. On the high end, I really do like Doug Baldwin and Devontae Adams this year. I think the problem with them being is they're already going as kind of the 7th, 8th receiver off the board. So
Yeah.
you're not really the only way you're going to really reach for those guys is if you. I mean, I've seen Adams go start of the second round. So at that point, it's like unless you're really willing to take them, end of the first ahead of somebody like Julio or Beckham, you're not really, going to be able to get them much higher than where they're going. So that's kind of been that. I think the middle is kind of where it gets a little bit messy. I just think there's a lot of there's a lot, whether it's running back or receiver, there's just a lot of players with question marks, which is
Hmm.
kind of why I've been leaning towards tight end a lot in kind of the third round there. Because really, if I don't get Kelsey or Ertz, I'm not really grabbing any of those middle tier guys. I'm usually waiting and grabbing Trey Burton or Kyle Rudolph a little bit later. But that's kind of where I found myself in that spot. That third to fifth round where if you're picking at the back end of the first, it's just picks that have upside, but you don't feel great about. There's not a lot of guys there that you feel good, from a consistency and stability standpoint. But that's the case for everybody. So it's kind of where it's a level playing field. We're all dealing with the same issues there.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there. Devontae Booker, I like that call quite a bit. As a guy going in the 10th, 11th, 12th, maybe, his minute late pick was almost 170. So, there's a lot. This guy, yes, we want to be excited about Royce Freeman, but this happens every year where we get all excited about these rookie picks. So we were just head over heels into these rookie drafts, and we were talking about all these young players that were going to be really good. But Devontae Booker still has the potential to be much better in that offense. Obviously, they brought in Case Keenum, so they actually have a real quarterback. So, there is a non-zero chance where he's the starter all season long, and he's really good. And even if he does C.J. Anderson type numbers, where he's a top 15, top 20 guy, for a guy you're getting in the 10th round, I love that pick. And as I mentioned, I'm kind of a guy that leans receiver early. He's exactly what I'm looking for. He has the upside. I can get him later. And if he doesn't pan out, he doesn't pan out. But at that point, it's definitely worthwhile. And then the Vance McDonald call I like a lot too. Like you, if I'm not getting Ertz, if I'm not getting Gronk, if I'm not getting Kelsey, even Evan Ingram right there, I'm waiting and waiting and waiting. And Vance is a definitely interesting guy. We've seen Steelers tight ends be useful. It seems like they kind of have really interested in kind of making him part of their offense. I guess, they have Juju, they have Antonio Brown, they have Le'Veon Bell, they brought in James Washington. I guess best ball it helps because the weeks where he goes off, he's going to be better. But in terms of just kind of season long, is Vance McDonald going to be a guy that you think we can kind of rely on where the ancillary pieces kind of fit in? Where he'll have maybe not massive weeks every week, but at least solid production? Or do you think he'll be kind of a guy that's better suited for best ball?
I do think you're probably gonna get more out of him in best ball, just because so much of that offense is going to go to Brown and Bell there that there's just the opportunity isn't going to be consistent for him week to week. You mentioned Juju there. They're still keeping Jesse James. He's still going to be a guy that I'm sure is going to be used in the red zone. My kind of optimism for Vance McDonald really stems from what we saw in the playoffs against Jacksonville. Obviously, he didn't do much for them during the regular season, but then in that game he had something crazy like 13 or 14 catches. I don't have the numbers in front of me here, but which not only shows his upside in terms of production, but they clearly trusted him if they were going to him, in basically the most important game of their season. And I'm sure some of that had to do with the fact that the Jaguars obviously had Ramsey and Bowie on the corner, so they probably weren't throwing to their receivers as much as they normally would.
Yeah.
But obviously, being a converted receiver himself, McDonald kind of offers that athleticism and that upside from a playmaking standpoint that a lot of tight ends don't. It's just a question of what's the target distribution going to look like on a week to week basis,
Yeah.
and it's hard to project them for anything more than 4 or 5 targets at most really on a weekly basis right now. So,
Yeah.
but I think the nice thing is that even though you see him getting pushed up in best ball, I think if we look at ADP, in a month or so when we start doing kind of your traditional drafts, I don't think he's going to be somebody that's going to be going as a top 12 tight end or anything. So you can
Yeah.
usually, depending on the size of your league, either grab him as kind of your backup tight end, or possibly even just throw him on your watch list, leave him on the wire, and if we see something week 1 or week 2, jump in and scoop him. But I don't think he's going to cost you as much as some of this MFL ADP would lead you to believe right now.
Yeah, I mean, in that Jacksonville game, he had 16 targets, caught 10 of them for 112 yards. We've seen him have explosive plays with the Niners, so the athleticism is definitely there, and he's definitely guys interesting. Obviously, if you're streaming tight ends as the season goes along, you're waiting at the position. He's going to be a good option in certain weeks, but you're just going to have to be fine where if it's a heavy Le'Veon Bell game or if it's a heavy Antonio Brown game and he only gets 3 or 4 targets, you have to be okay with that because the upside's going to be there as well. Is there anybody you're cooling on? Anybody that you kind of were excited about, as the season ended, thinking, oh, this is going to be a guy I'm going to want next year? And now that we're, the draft came and gone and we're rolling into June and OTAs and training camp, is there a guy that you're starting to kind of pump the brakes on and not draft as much?
There's certainly guys that I've kind of actively avoided, if you will, but it hasn't been really a shift in terms of guys that I really liked coming out of last year that I suddenly don't anymore. It's kind of just been a fluid situation. I think at quarterback, Dak Prescott's just a guy that I pretty much crossed off my draft board. I really don't see anything around him aside from Zeke that's going to allow him to kind of, really have much of an upside in the passing game. I mean, their wide receiver core is a disaster right now. They can't seem to figure out what they're doing at tight end. They're turning Rico Gathers into a freaking left guard. So, I just don't see who he's going to be throwing the ball to. I think it's going to be a lot of Zeke, and unless Prescott can, get you 8 rushing touchdowns or something like that, I just find it hard for him to put up consistent numbers. And then aside from that, it's some of these committee situations. I think I really like Aaron Jones in Green Bay, but that's looking like, a situation where you could have, 3 guys getting 8 to 10 touches on a weekly basis. So I don't really want to try to, invest too many resources in that, knowing very well that it could easily, shift on a week-to-week basis. But aside from that, I mean, there's not really much that jumps out in terms of guys that I'm just steering clear of. I'm kind of off Jordy. I think some people are kind of buying the bounce back there. I know depends how much you kind of blame Hundley for what happened last year, but if you look at kind of some of the deeper metrics on Jordy, he just doesn't seem to be the same player he was in terms of being able to create separation and create yards after the catch. So I'm not really buying much of a turnaround from him there. But yeah, that's kind of the few names there that come to mind.
Yeah, no, yeah, and I think some of the committees are concerning. Marlon Mack's a guy that I'm kind of cooling a little bit on, but the return of Andrew Luck is helping that. Obviously, Jordan Wilkins is somebody that, like, in deep leagues, I'm kind of grabbing. I'm kind of grabbing at the end and seeing if it happens. The Dak thing is interesting just because. Like it's weird because Des Bryant was so inefficient and he wasn't really that great, and they didn't have Zeke for part of the year, and Dak was still able to be pretty solid. They brought in Allen Hurns, they brought in Michael Gallup. I don't know. I'm a little more optimistic. I'm kind of hoping that people aren't on him and he's a guy that I can kind of get really late or stream if things are going well the first couple weeks. But we'll have to see. I think there's a little more potential, and it'll be interesting to see if he runs a little bit more to kind of compensate for some of the offensive problems, I guess. But that there's definitely reasons for concern with that offense for sure.
Yeah, no, that's kind of where I'm at. I mean, he did finish looks like QB 11 last year, which is better than I would have guessed kind of off the top of my mind. Obviously, he had the 6 rushing touchdowns, which kind of played into that. We'll see. I just, when you read some of the stuff and you hear that kind of Cole Beasley and Terrence Williams are in their base 3 receiver sets, it's pretty hard to get excited.
Yeah, but I mean, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. He's QB 20 right now. Like I'll take that all day. Like I'll take him over Alex Smith. Yeah, I don't know. I guess that's. I mean, it's interesting because I'm looking at the top 20 and like him versus Jameis. I probably would rather have Jameis. Him versus Luck. I mean, Luck. If he's healthy, I'll take Luck. If he's not, whatever. Matt Ryan, that's an interesting one. Pat Mahomes, who we're going to talk about here in a second. Mariota, Jared Goff, Phil Rivers. Like when you kind of look at all the names, like it really makes, yeah, he's QB 20, but that kind of seems like the right range.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'd take all those guys you mentioned ahead of him. I mean, for me, it's like, he kind of falls closer to kind of the Derek Carr, like Eli Manning, Andy Dalton range than he does those guys. So,
Yeah.
I'm certainly not going to have him on any teams, but you can certainly make a case for kind of how it would play out where he does get that fantasy production because we have seen it in the past, and that's obviously important.
Yep. So hopefully he becomes a streaming option or DFS guy, and that's kind of it. Let's talk Chiefs because obviously, Kareem Hunt's a guy that people are talking about first round, top 5-ish type running back, was incredible last year. Tyreek Hill is a guy that I'm starting to pump the brakes on just a little bit after talking with Jared Smola of Draft Sharks about him, just because of some of the explosive plays that may not be there. But even then, he's still a guy that we should consider, in the top 10 at the position or top 15 at least. Getting drafted right now, 3, 6, 9, top 10. So. And then Travis Kelce obviously could be the TE1. So if we like Hunt, we like Hill, we like Kelce. Pat Mahomes has to be somebody that we all kind of collectively get a little more excited about. I mean, I guess for you, you're excited about him and you kind of want everybody else to not be as excited. But like, it seems like it would be really hard for all these players to be really productive in this Chiefs offense and for Mahomes to just kind of be average.
No, that's kind of the point I've been trying to make is that you can have a quarterback that is a really strong fantasy play, but not necessarily have a lot of receivers or basically individual skill position players, just because they have the ability to kind of spread the ball around. We kind of saw it with Drew Brees and kind of the Saints a few years ago where Brees was consistently a top 1, top 2 QB, but really aside from like Marcus Colston or when he had Jimmy Graham, the rest of the guys on that team, it's just they were all getting 2-3 catches, whether it was Lance Moore or Devery Henderson. You really couldn't start too many of their skill players, but you still knew that Brees was going to finish as a top 3 QB. But it doesn't really work the other way. If you have a team where you love their receivers, you love the running backs, you think they're going to have a ton of fantasy production, unless the team's rotating quarterbacks, all that has to go to one quarterback. Mm-hmm. And kind of the one thing people can kind of point to where how does a quarterback if you have an offense that scores a lot of fantasy points, what would be the reason why their quarterback wouldn't be a top 10 or top 12 play? And I've heard this kind of brought up with Eli Manning. If we love Beckham and Barkley, like how's he going to, why shouldn't Eli be like a top 15 quarterback? And a lot of times it's the quarterbacks that literally give you nothing in the run game. Like even in Eli's case, because we have, Cam Newton and Carson Wentz and Dak Prescott, all these guys that are going to give you, even like Andy Dalton gets you 3 rushing touchdowns a year. Yeah. That's a lot of production that like Eli's never going to give you, that forces him to be so much better in the passing game in order to keep pace with those guys. But that's not the problem with Mahomes. I mean, the dude had 22 rushing touchdowns his last 2 years in college. Like he's going to be fine in terms of giving you ground production. But my other thing is, I mean, Alex Smith last season, nobody saw that coming, right? I mean, it was like the exact opposite of what Alex Smith had been his entire career in terms of how often he was thrown downfield, in terms of his fantasy upside. I think he actually led all quarterbacks last year in games with 25 or more fantasy points. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the deep passing metrics in terms of how many big plays he made, he was kind of all over the leaderboards there too. But do you really believe that Alex Smith suddenly became a different quarterback in year 11 of his career?
Yeah, it was the first time that he ever produced a top 15 fantasy wide receiver in his career, and with Tyreek Hill. So I'm with you. Like that, obviously. Now that raises the question. Matt Nagy's now in Chicago. Do you have some concerns that Andy Reid's going to do Andy Reid things and kind of hone in the offense a little bit. And I guess if we, so either Mahomes is going to be great, and maybe not, Alex Smith top five great, but should be in the top 12 conversation at least with all these weapons. Either we think that, or we think Mahomes is going to struggle, that Reed's going to call some bad plays, and then Travis Kelce is going to be a fine tight end, maybe tight end 3. Maybe Tyreek Hill's more of a 2-3 option instead of a guy who could challenge for wide receiver 1. Maybe Kareem Hunt's fine. Maybe they actually run the ball more. Maybe Kareem Hunt's the guy, and the pass catchers kind of take a step back. But they all can't be true, right?
Yeah, well, if you want to make the Nagy argument, I can understand that. I think that's the best case against, or the best case for why this offense would regress. But I mean, I think if we're kind of looking at it, like I have a hard time believing that when somebody tries to tell me that this offense is going to be more conservative with Pat Mahomes than it was with Alex Smith, because Alex Smith was the guy that for his entire career you had to force him to basically throw a pass over 6 yards. Whereas with Mahomes, if you watch him in college, you're basically gonna have to force him not to throw a 30-yard pass on every play. Like
Yeah.
that guy has no interest in checking down and throwing swing passes. Like he's launching the ball downfield whenever he can get a chance. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm not worried. Even if we say okay, if they try to get more conservative with the playbook, I just think he's going to try to make plays, and sure, it'll probably lead to a few more turnovers. But you can't tell me that Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce were able to make all these plays downfield with Alex Smith, and they're not going to be able to make them with Patrick Mahomes. That just I don't see the logic in that. So I think maybe the efficiency can drop down a little bit, but
Mm-hmm.
I think in terms of volume and the opportunities that those guys are going to get downfield, especially now that they added Sammy Watkins, I don't think Watkins is necessarily going to be a terrific player himself, just because I'm not saying Pat Mahomes is going to have a top 5 all time season here where we're going to have circa the 2007 Patriots, where it's kind of Wes Welker and Randy Moss and all that all over again. I'm not saying that, but I think in terms of what it does for this offense, I mean, Sammy Watkins is a legitimate deep threat. Last year they were throwing Chris Conley and
Yeah.
Demarcus Robinson on the
And
outside.
Albert
Like,
Wilson and
yeah, it's like you can't say that's not a major upgrade in terms of what it does for opening stuff up underneath. There's been and Kareem Hunt more involved in the pass game this year. So we'll see. I'm obviously kind of going all in on Mahomes here, and kind of when you do that, you got to believe in all these skill players. But again, if they did what they did last year and kind of up to a level we'd never seen him reach in his career. I certainly think that's something though we can see again this year with Mahomes.
yeah, no, I totally agree. And you brought up Eli Manning, and yeah, he's probably not going to be a guy that challenges for top 10 at the position, but like the amount of talent that's going to be there, Eli Manning is going to have big weeks again. Eli Manning, if you're in two QB leagues, is going to be a guy that you're going to be able to play a lot and is going to be useful. If you have Evan Ingram, if you have healthy Odell, if you have Saquon Barkley taking off some of the pressure, if you have Sterling Shepard becoming the player that fantasy Twitter thinks he is, like there's just too many mouths to feed and too much talent in that offense for Eli Manning just to be a top like 25 quarterback.
No, yeah, that's a valid point, and I think when you kind of get to the bottom of those QB rankings, and in MFLs, a lot of times it's your third quarterback, but if you're playing in kind of your 10 or 12 team league, and it happens to be a 2 QB league, I think he's certainly a guy that it's tough for me to kind of reconcile, just because I really don't like Eli as a player.
Yeah.
And it's not just because I'm a Patriots fan. I've just watched him play a lot, being kind of in the tri-state area here, and I just don't think he's good at football anymore. And to some extent, like Beckham and Barkley will literally drag his carcass to production.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a reality that I think you have to kind of accept, that he, in terms of an offensive environment, and especially with Pat Shurmur coming in, I can't kind of overstate the improvement that should be over Ben McAdoo and his three-yard Shane Vereen dump offs 6 plays in a row. So I think there's definitely a case to be made for why Eli can be somebody that's kind of a, I think best case scenario maybe a low end QB1 this year, and it won't be on my team, but I can certainly see why people are kind of more excited about him this year than in years past.
Yeah, and you can stop me if this gives you a little PTSD, but I think Joe Flacco might be in that same boat. Michael Crabtree, Willie Snead. I don't know. I think there's stuff to like. Obviously, I don't think he's going to be anything special, but I think he'll be better than the carcass we saw the past couple seasons.
The
Uh,
the if you've been reading the Roto World blurbs, they've been having a fun time with some of the stuff the Ravens have been doing. They I think first when they got busted for the like the training camp violations. I guess they were like practicing in pads when they weren't supposed to, and it's like the second consecutive year they've lost like multiple practices due to like the same infraction, and the like Harbaugh's quotes were like made it seem like he really had no idea like why like what they were doing wrong, or it seemed bizarre because it's like you can't, like, if they tell you can't practice in pads and all your guys are in like full pads, like that's not really like it's not something you can kind of talk your way out of, like it's not really something you can hide.
yeah,
But
it's pretty black and white.
the news blurb basically said, if it's 2 consecutive years the Ravens are doing this, if they're going to go to all this trouble to basically not follow the rules, you'd think it would actually lead to better results on the field, which clearly hasn't been the case. And then they had a blurb about Rashad Perryman and how he's still struggling with drops, and kind of like the quote from their reporter literally said that Perryman had dropped at least two passes, a pass or two passes in every single practice that had been open to the media, like basically all of minicamp, which is just funny to read. It's basically like somebody telling you, like, every single day at your job you just continue to mess up. Like you're literally incapable of having one day where you don't mess up.
But it's not even like his job. It's like he's practicing for his job and he still can't mess up.
Right? Yeah, it's like he's just trying to get some reps in, and he still can't do it.
Too funny. But yeah, I want to use this kind of as a jumping off point because obviously there's a lot to be excited about with some of these offenses and some of these young quarterbacks, and Jimmy Garoppolo and Deshaun Watson are getting a lot of attention, and these are two guys that started a total of 12 games last year, and Carson Wentz is working his way back. Obviously, Trubisky, who will now have Nagy and has Allen Robinson and Anthony Miller and the running backs, and there's a lot to like. But I guess what's your optimism or pessimism in regards to especially Watson and Garoppolo, who haven't played very much, and people are kind of drafting as these guys that you can just pencil in and be fine at quarterback.
I like Garoppolo, but I think kind of we're getting a little bit carried away with expectations for him, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that I think we're just confusing how well the 49ers played with him, as a team under center versus his actual fantasy production. Because everybody kind of remembers, him coming in and the Niners basically winning every game to close out the year. And he was throwing for a lot of yards, but I think he had something like 7 touchdowns and 6 interceptions, or 7 and 5. Nothing too crazy. I think he was kind of a low in QB1 over the 5 weeks that he started in terms of fantasy points. And you have to consider that Andrew Luck was out. Aaron Rodgers was out. Carson Wentz was injured by that point. Deshaun Watson was injured by that point. So, if those guys are playing and performing like they did earlier in the season, or in Luck's case, what we've kind of come to expect when he's healthy, they're all finishing ahead of Garoppolo. And now he goes from being, the 9th or 10th quarterback to the 15th or the 16th quarterback. And nobody's, kind of banging down the door to tell you to draft this guy as a top 10 QB when, basically the sample size of him starting is a mid-level QB for fantasy. So yeah. I think we're getting that mixed up. I think people remember they put up 41 points on Jacksonville. Yeah, they did, but it's not like Garoppolo threw 4 touchdowns that game. They had some defensive plays there. They had some other ways of scoring it. So I think it's kind of when you really look a little bit deeper, I don't think the numbers tell you that he should all of a sudden, be this top 10 QB. But then again, on the flip side, he gets a full year with kind of Kyle Shanahan. We obviously saw what he did with Matt Ryan there.
Hmm.
Um, you know, bringing in Jerick McKinnon, getting Pierre Garcon back, kind of the emergence of Marquise Goodwin. There's a lot of kind of pieces around him that you can use to make an argument for why we're going to see better production. But
Yeah.
I don't think I think the hype train on him has gone so far that it's just going to be hard. I'm not willing to take him as a top 8, even top 10 QB, and that's where you're going to have to do it to get him. I don't think you're going to be able to get him as the 13th, 14th quarterback off the board, which is kind of where I would project him finishing.
Yeah, and I'm 100% with you there. He's currently pick 110, QB 11 right now per MFL 10's ADP. So that's kind of what I've been using until we get a better kind of understanding of where these guys are going as more redraft leagues start going. But yeah, I'm with you. I think if anything, I'm going to try and get some of those pieces you mentioned. I'm going to try and get George Kittle or Marquise Goodwin or Pierre Garcon saying, okay, if Jimmy G is going to be awesome and he's going to go off, it's probably going to be with these guys, and these are going to be pieces I want. Now, I would much rather pay the Jimmy G price than pay the Deshaun Watson price, who's going as QB3 in front of Brady, in front of Cam, in front of Carson, in front of Drew Brees. I know the upside, and I saw how amazing he was when he was playing, and I'm really in on Nuke Hopkins, and I think there's a lot of potential there. But a top 70 player, a third QB off the board, that feels really aggressive.
Uh, it's tough with Watson because on one hand, yeah, yes, the sample size is what it is. Only having started those 6 games. And if you look at kind of, obviously he didn't qualify for any of for any of the statistics. If you're looking at like YPA, or touchdown percentage, you can see what his is, but it won't show up in terms of leaders because he didn't have enough pass attempts. But like he would have, I think Drew Brees led the NFL in YPA last year, and if Watson had qualified, he would have finished above him. Carson Wentz led it in touchdown percentage, but if Watson had qualified, he would have finished above him as well. So, if you think that what he's doing is basically sustainable, which I don't think anybody does. I think we're all assuming there's going to be some level of regression. But basically, he was the best QB in all these categories. A lot of which had to do with just how many big plays he made. But on the flip side, that he doesn't necessarily have to be as good as he was in those 6 games to be a top 3, top 4 quarterback. We see it with Brady every year where he seems to kind of really, I'm gonna say struggle, but usually from like week 11 to week 15, they have those games against the Jets and the Dolphins and stuff, and Brady's giving you 18, 19 fantasy points those games, but at the end of the year, you look up, he's still always a top 5 QB, and that's kind of what I think we can see with Watson is because and maybe Cam Newton's a better comparison just because he has such drastic highs and lows. I mean, if you look at the numbers on Newton last year, was ridiculous in terms of, I think he had 3 30-point games, and then he had a bunch of games where he had like 11 or 12 points. So it was just so volatile that I think, I don't think Watson will be to that level. But it's a thing where, he doesn't necessarily have to score 35 points every game to be worth, getting drafted as a top 3 QB. I do think that, aside from Nuke, I don't think that offensive situation is that great in terms of, I like Will Fuller, but he's not really a reliable number 2 receiver. He's more of kind of a boomer bust guy, a little bit like Deshaun Jackson, obviously. And it just so happened that he kind of put together all of his good games in that stretch with Watson, and obviously that's not random. There was a reason for that. It's not something that you can count on a week to week basis. But then you look at that, they don't really have a clear number 3 receiver. They don't really have a tight end we like. They don't really have a guy in the backfield that's a great pass catcher. So it's kind of the anti Kansas City where we have all these guys we like. It's basically Watson and Hopkins, and I certainly think even if they kind of do 75% of what we saw last year, but for a whole season in Watson's case, he'll probably still be a top, top 5, top 8 QB. So I can see that. I don't think it's crazy. With me, I'm just usually not drafting a quarterback until
Yeah.
at least kind of 6 or 7, 8 of them have gone off the board. So I'm not getting him, but I don't have a problem with people kind of taking him, in the top 5 at QB.
Yeah, I mean, that touchdown regression is coming. He definitely, I think, to your point, feels if he's going to be kind of that elite guy, he's going to be basically what Breeze is, where he'll spread it around to all these different guys. And then he'll obviously use his rushing ability to kind of supplement the passing. So maybe the touchdowns come down a little bit. Maybe the rushes a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, the 9.3 touchdown percentage is just unsustainable. So even if it comes down to 6 or 6.5, which is among the elite of the NFL last year, it's still solid, but definitely cause for pause. And like if I'm drafting and I'm set on taking a quarterback, I'm taking Breeze, I'm taking Carson Wentz, I'm taking Cam Newton, and probably Tom Brady all in front of him.
Uh, yeah, I don't see. I think I take Rodgers over him.
Yeah.
But really, I mean, the thing is I feel like there's a lot of questions with a lot of those guys now.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't take Newton over him. I just think Newton's too volatile as a passer. I don't, if we were playing roto football, sure. But the problem with Cam Newton is that, he's either going to win you the week or he's going to lose you the week. He kind of rarely just keeps you afloat. And I don't want that volatility at quarterback. I love Brady, but I don't know what's going to happen with that. We'll see what comes with the Edelman, suspension and stuff. The thing with him is, he kind of always makes it work, but it is kind of a messy receiver group there that they're working with right now between some of the injury concerns that those guys have and I mean Jordan Matthews, like Kenny Britt, it's like if this was like 2013, I'd be getting excited, but like it seems like those guys might be not in peak right now. So we'll see what happens. But and I mean that's also kind of the argument for like why I'm usually just not really grabbing a quarterback, and because I'll wait for Pat Mahomes or I'll wait for the guys that kind of fall outside the top 10. But I do think that part of that is what's making the case for Watson easier is that even what we saw with Breeze last year, it's not it's not like those years where we had Breeze and Peyton Manning and Aaron Rodgers kind of in their primes, being a clear tier above everybody else, which would have made difficult to kind of take these rookie quarterbacks or second year quarterbacks like Watson and Wentz and all of a sudden vault them into the top 5. But I think that's what's making it easier. And even Russell Wilson, who I think is going as the second or third quarterback off the board a lot. I mean, that team really doesn't have much in terms of a receiving core right now either. And they could really kind of flip the script and become a much more run-heavy team, which if they do is obviously not great for Russell Wilson, who basically accounted for, like 95% of their touchdowns last year.
Yeah.
So, just more kind of stuff to keep an eye on.
Yeah, between Russell Wilson's slow starts the past couple of years and the clear, commitment to returning to running the football a lot more, taking Rashad Penny, adding offensive line in the second round. They obviously still have the guy they got from the Texans last year, so they're clearly heading in that direction. I still think Russell Wilson will be fine, but I don't know. It seems a little crazy, and honestly, I don't hate the idea if you're gonna reach on Watson. It's not the end of the world because if he doesn't work out, if he's not awesome, you can go to Matt Ryan, you can go to Pat Mahomes, you can go to Jameis, you can go to Alex Smith, you can go to Dak Prescott, Derek Carr, Mitchell Trubisky. I mean, these are guys that are outside the top 15 at quarterback. So, like, this position is really feels like there's Aaron Rodgers, and then there's kind of a clear tier 2. And then just a whole bunch of names that you're going to be able to play in depending on the matchup and all that stuff that kind of mix and match and make it work. Okay, I think that will do it unless you had anyone else you wanted to hit on before we get out of here.
No, I think that about covers it. It's there's still obviously kind of a lot of stuff up in the air in terms of how these depth charts and things like that are going to shape out. So,
Hmm.
I'm kind of interested to see what happens in Oakland, and if Gruden really turns them into, a 1970s offense. Or because that's kind of the the contrast, the weird contrast with, I think, with how um, I think a lot of people are kind of jumping back in on the Amari Cooper bandwagon, with Crabtree gone, and well, he's still so young, he's still pretty accomplished for in terms of what he's already achieved to this point in his career. And obviously, we loved him coming out, and it's like that. Gruden has had kind of very productive wide receiver ones under him, but he's spending the rest of the time signing fullbacks and Doug Martins and blocking tight ends, and it's like how is this whole offense going to work? So, that's just something I'm going to be keeping an eye on,
Yeah.
and
They're,
just a few other situations like that.
they're going five offensive linemen. They're going Derek Carr, and then all running backs, and then it can probably got to get a fullback in there too. But yeah, that's gonna be a mess because like Marshawn Lynch had moments last year. Obviously, we like DeAndre Washington, um, and Blake and the other guy, and then they brought in Doug Martin. So there's so many mouths to feed. It'll be interesting to see if they kind of have a clear cut. Depth chart, or if they're going to be mixing and matching. Miami's another situation where I think Kenyon Drake can be somebody that's really impactful, but they also brought in Frank Gore and they brought in Kalen Balaj, and that could turn into a mess, especially if Ryan Tannehill's not good. And no matter how good Drake is, if they're stacking the box, it's not going to be that helpful. So there's a lot. Alex Collins, another guy, Baltimore. I'm really excited to see potentially doing stuff, and I don't know, but I'm really excited for the next 2 months. I'm booking my big home league cabin for we go up the hill and do a whole weekend. So that means the season's approaching, and I cannot be more excited. And Damian, thank you so much for joining us. Make sure you follow Damian if you're not already doing so. D_bro1389. Make sure you're following me. Make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube feed. If you're doing MFL 10s, if you're doing startups, if you have questions, don't hesitate to send them our way. But for Damian Dabrowski, I'm Kyle Robert, and we'll talk to you next time.